Why Kublai Khan's Mongols couldn't conquer Vietnam. Imagine an army so powerful that kingdoms across Asia and Europe trembled at the mere mention of its name. An army that swept across the vast steppes, destroyed the mighty Khwarezmian Empire, crushed the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, and even threatened the heart of Europe. This was the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known. And yet, in a small corner of Southeast Asia, on the narrow strip of land we now call Vietnam, this unstoppable war machine met its match. Not once, not twice, but three separate times in 1258, 1285, and 1288, the Mongols, or rather their successors, the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan, launched invasions against Đại Việt. Each time they expected a swift conquest. Each time they were forced to retreat in humiliation. How could a small kingdom of only a few million people resist the fury of the world's most feared conquerors? What made Đại Việt different from the vast territories that had fallen before the Mongol horsemen? The answer lies not in sheer numbers or superior weapons, but in a remarkable combination of geography, strategy, leadership, and above all, the unyielding will of an entire people to defend their homeland. In this video, we'll uncover the reasons behind one of history's most fascinating military paradoxes. Why the Mongols, masters of the battlefield, failed 3 times against tiny Đại Việt. To understand the Mongols' failure, we must first look at the battlefield itself. The Mongol war machine was built upon the open steppes. Their cavalry could travel incredible distances each day, using speed and mobility to surround, confuse, and annihilate their enemies. On flat plains, there was no force on earth that could match them. But Đại Việt was the exact opposite of the Mongols' natural battlefield. Instead of endless grasslands, they faced a land of dense jungles, steep mountains, and countless rivers. The terrain was narrow, broken, and unpredictable. It was a nightmare for cavalry warfare. Horses, the very backbone of Mongol power, struggled to move in swamps and forests. Even worse, the humid tropical climate was alien to them. Diseases spread quickly, supplies rotted, the horses fell sick, losing stamina and even dying in large numbers. The Vietnamese, on the other hand, thrived in this environment. They knew every river crossing, every hidden path in the forest, every tidal pattern along the coast. Their armies were not dependent on cavalry, but instead relied heavily on infantry, and most importantly, naval forces. In fact, the Vietnamese had centuries of experience in river warfare, mastering the art of fighting on water as well as on land. This natural advantage created the first major imbalance. The Mongols, who had conquered kingdoms across Eurasia, suddenly found themselves fighting in a place where their greatest strength, cavalry maneuver warfare, was almost useless. In short, the geography and climate of Đại Việt turned the Mongols' most powerful weapon into a crippling weakness, setting the stage for further defeats. If geography weakened the Mongols, it was Vietnamese strategy that truly defeated them. Unlike many kingdoms that tried to meet the invaders head-on and were swiftly crushed, Đại Việt adopted a very different approach, one that turned the Mongols' own style of warfare against them. The Vietnamese rulers of the Trần dynasty understood one critical fact. The Mongols thrived on quick victories. Their campaigns relied on speed and psychological shock. If a nation resisted for too long, the invaders would run into supply problems. So instead of offering the Mongols the decisive battle they desired, the Trần generals avoided large-scale confrontations at the start. They implemented what is famously known as the scorched-earth strategy, destroying crops, emptying villages, and withdrawing the population to safer areas. To the advancing Mongols, it looked as if they were marching into a land already abandoned. But in reality, they were marching deeper into a carefully laid trap. As the Mongols struggled to feed their armies and horses, Vietnamese forces struck from the shadows. Guerrilla warfare became their weapon of choice. Small, mobile units launched ambushes, night raids, and sudden attacks on supply lines. Then they vanished back into the forests and rivers before the Mongols could retaliate. Over time, these small wounds accumulated into devastating losses. By the time the Mongols were weakened, the Tran generals would launch counterattacks at carefully chosen moments. This pattern repeated itself across all three invasions. The climax came in 1288 at the Battle of Bak Dang River. Trần Hưng Đạo used the tides to his advantage, planting wooden stakes beneath the water. When the Mongol fleet advanced, the tide receded, impaling their ships on the hidden barriers. Trapped and helpless, the invaders were annihilated in one of the most brilliant naval ambushes in world history. Through patience, deception, and perfectly timed strikes, Đại Việt transformed its weakness into strength and the Mongols' aggression into their downfall. Perhaps the greatest strength of Đại Việt was not found in its forests, rivers, or clever tactics, but in its people. Unlike many nations that fell quickly to the Mongols because their rulers surrendered in order to preserve their own status, Đại Việt stood united. In 1284, when Kublai Khan prepared his second great invasion, the Tran dynasty faced an impossible choice: resist and risk annihilation, or submit and lose independence. To decide, the king called the Hội nghị Điện Hùng, the Council of Điện Hùng, where elders from across the land gathered. When asked whether to fight or to yield, they answered with one voice: fight! This moment became a symbol of national unity, showing that the entire society, leaders and common people alike, chose resistance no matter the cost. This unity was matched by extraordinary leadership. At the center stood Trần Hưng Đạo, perhaps one of the greatest generals in Vietnamese history. He understood the Mongols better than almost anyone else, and he crafted strategies that combined patience with decisive strikes. His writings, such as the famous Hich Tuong Si, Appeal to the Soldiers, inspired his troops with both loyalty and courage. But he was not alone. Commanders like Tran Quang Khai, Trần Nhật Duật, and Prince Trần Quốc Tuan each played vital roles. Some led daring counterattacks, others negotiated to delay the enemy, and still others inspired the people with their bravery. Together, this leadership ensured that morale never collapsed. While the Mongols expected internal division, they instead faced a nation where farmers, fishermen, monks, and nobles alike all fought under one banner. It was this combination of unbreakable spirit and brilliant command that transformed Đại Việt into one of the few nations on earth capable of defeating the Mongol Empire not once but 3 times. Even with courage and clever tactics, Đại Viet's victory would not have been possible without exploiting one of the Mongols' greatest vulnerabilities: logistics. The Mongol war machine was designed for campaigns across the steppes, where their armies could live off the land, seizing grain, livestock, and fodder from conquered peoples. But in Đại Việt, the scorched earth strategy denied them these resources. Villages were abandoned, fields were burned, and storehouses emptied. Instead of feeding themselves, the Mongols found only hunger. Thousands of miles from their home bases in China and Mongolia, their supply lines were overstretched. The humid climate rotted what little food they carried. Horses, unable to graze properly, grew weak and died. Disease spread through the ranks. Each passing day drained their strength before they even met the Vietnamese in battle. The Vietnamese struck precisely at these weaknesses. In 1288, they intercepted and destroyed the massive supply fleet commanded by Trung Văn Ho. Without food, the mighty Mongol army had no choice but to retreat in chaos. This disaster set the stage for the final trap at Bak Dang River, where their retreating fleet was annihilated. On top of these logistical disasters came strategic arrogance. The Mongols underestimated Đại Việt, assuming it would surrender like many other states. They failed to adapt to the terrain, persisted in relying on cavalry, and launched repeated invasions without fully learning from past defeats. In the end, the Mongols faced not only a hostile environment and a resilient enemy, but also their own overconfidence. The result was clear: 3 failed invasions, enormous losses, and the permanent halt of Mongol expansion into Southeast Asia. Against all odds, a small kingdom that had humbled the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Thank you for respecting history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and write the bell so you don't miss any battles.